This is On Assignment.
Reporter presentation.
好了，VOA News, Baghdad.
VOA News.
Hi, I'm Imran Siddiqui here with Alex Villarreal, and we're taking you on assignment.
We'll talk with our correspondent in the Middle East about the still tense situation in Syria.
Facebook goes public. What's next for the social network?
The ever-changing price of oil wreaks havoc on the airlines. We'll talk with our economics expert.
And we'll look at an herbicide still in wide use in the United States.
These are the stories behind the stories. Let's go on assignment.
Violence has continued in Syria between government and opposition forces despite UN efforts to end the conflict. Syria held local elections recently, a process the government called a success, despite a light turnout and further protests.
VOA correspondent Elizabeth Arrett visited Syria recently and talked with us about her reporting from inside the country. Let's take a look. Talking about the people and the future of the country, you covered the country's first multi-party parliamentary elections. What did the Syrian people tell you about their thoughts on the vote?
I was in Damascus prior to the vote, and it was very difficult. People are saying, yes, we want the elections, but again, they weren't that free to talk about it.
Mohammed Badri is with the National Democratic Solidarity Party, one of several new opposition groups sanctioned by the government. His platform echoes the protesters' original demands.
We seek democracy and freedom of expression in media. We seek to achieve the hopes and aspirations of the conscience of the Syrian street.
The candidate argues a new constitution, another concession, offers hope of real reform.
The problem we have does not have to do with the law, but with its actual and direct application. Syria has a constitution of international standards.
He vows to implement those laws, a promise that has gained him followers. But when the opposition candidate is pressed about the current government, the limits of this exercise in reform become clear.
The Syrian leadership and the Syrian government are a far-sighted leadership. Syria was and will remain to be the focus of the whole Middle East. After the end of this crisis, it will be stronger economically and militarily.
So given that you were traveling with these government minders, how free were you to move around?
Not terribly. When you're going out to report of any kind, whether it's interviews, photographs, video, you need to have this government minder who's been assigned to you accompany you. And obviously that puts a lot of pressure on the person that you're talking to. And that said, I could go out with the UN convoy, went up to Homs and Hama, and that doesn't have, they have security personnel, but you don't actually have a minder with you.
These cities that you mentioned are obviously flashpoint cities. They've been hit hard by government shelling. How visible are the signs of violence in these areas?
Oh, it's quite visible. I mean, it's very, very sad and shocking. Not just Homs and Hama where you see the blacked out buildings, you know, from explosions and mortar shells and things, but other little towns in between which are also very much opposed to the government. Al-Rastan, for example, south of Hama, the edge of the town faces a valley, and it was just open exposure, and every single house along this ridge, you can see big blasts out of the side of their houses. They've all been hit by heavy weaponry.
You spoke to UN Mission Chief General Robert Mood. He said that the arrival of UN observers is having a calming effect on the situation. How would you say that corresponded with what you were actually experiencing?
Well, his statement actually is it's a little bit more calculated in that he says it's calming effect when they're in a place and in that place for that time. And so it might be good for those half an hour or 2 hours that they're in a certain area, but then he has to leave and the team leaves, and it's very hard to do the follow-up.
So what we are working on is a specific plan where you can go back to the specific site where you had an engagement, where you gave an advice, and to verify that the advice when it was taken is respected also 12 hours or 24 hours or 2 days later.
Was there anything else that he told you in your interview that stood out to you?
One of the things he noted, and I think he wanted to make the point that what much of the world sees in terms of Syria are these really brutal, horrible scenes of devastation. But there's also a large part of Syria that is still living in very normal times.
I think it's key for any audience, if I might use that term, outside Syria, to understand that the Syria we meet on the ground is very different from the Syria they see through the dramatic headlines in the media and through the reports in the written media. The Syrian people, they are proud, they are warm, they are extremely proud of their history.
We see the opposition, we see the government, but then there are an awful lot of people in the middle who feel kind of caught. They don't want, they have no love lost maybe for the government, but they're pretty scared by the fighting and what that might signify in the future.
And they are scared about the alternative, many of them, because that alternative for them is seen as a collapse and a direction that would lead to even more violence and more suffering.
So there's a very large part of the country that is caught up in this, but not in the violence.
Thanks again to our Cairo-based correspondent, Elizabeth Arrett. It's time now for a break.
And when we come back, Facebook goes to Wall Street in search of more money, a lot of money. You're watching On Assignment.
This is the Voice of America. Take a picture for it was extended.
VOA Special English, a way to learn American English and much more. Broadcasting news and features around the world on radio, television, and on the web at voaspecialenglish.com. For 50 years, helping people understand world events and the language and culture of America.
The Voice of America is offering online English lessons. The Classroom is Voice of America's new online English classroom. From the VOA homepage, click on Learning English and then click on the classroom to start learning English. In the classroom, you will find current news articles with customized English language lessons, English language activities for beginning, intermediate, and advanced English speakers, interactive word books and dictionaries under the Interactive Learning tab, and English programs showing you how English is really spoken, and English lessons available for teachers all over the world to use in their classrooms. Learn English with Voice of America. Click on the classroom to start learning English today.
The founders of Facebook have been working to promote the company's initial public offering, or IPO, through which they hope to raise more than $10 billion. If successful, the IPO will give Facebook a market value closer to Google's. VOA's business reporter Mil Arcega joins us. Thank you so much for taking the time.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Mil, bottom line, can I make money through Facebook by buying their shares?
Let me give you a warning before you actually buy a share. You can make money. There's definitely an upside to this, but make sure that whatever money you invest, you can afford to lose. And then we can talk about the downsides of that as well, which I think I explore in my story.
Okay, so why don't we check out the story first and then we'll come back to it.
Few could have imagined that what started as a university dormitory project just 8 years ago would attract 900 million users worldwide and have an estimated value equal to the GDP of a small country. Based on an initial asking price of $28 to $35 per share, stock analyst Max Wolf says the company may be worth upwards of $80 billion.
I think they'll get the valuation. I think they'll probably trade up on the first day. That being said, they're trying to take as much money in their IPO as possible.
But not everyone is convinced of Facebook's money-making potential.
I would not invest in it.
Jeff Corbin, CEO at KCSA Strategic Communications, tells VOA that based on its advertising revenue, the company is worth considerably less. He uses the valuation formula for Google, which is roughly 5.5 times its annual advertising revenue.
So if you use that multiple and you apply it to Facebook, on, say, 400 million in revenue, multiply that by 5.5, maybe you have a 20 to 25 billion dollar valuation. Certainly not a $100 billion valuation.
Max Wolf admits the current valuation is aggressive, but he believes Facebook has momentum.
The bigger you are, the harder it is to grow. That being said, we still think the company is a growth story. Clearly the market does too.
That may be so, but for now, Corbin tells casual investors to steer clear from the hype.
What I feel is almost certain to happen is unless the company gives specific metrics and indicates how they're going to increase those metrics, every quarter will be a disappointment for the company.
Facebook's roadshow is sure to answer similar investor concerns as it crisscrosses major cities across the U.S. Facebook is expected to officially debut in the New York Stock Exchange as early as May 18th. Millar Sega, VOA News, Washington.
We're back with Millar Sega. Mil, $10 billion, that's a boatload of money.
It sure is.
What's going to happen to Facebook once they do achieve that? One, and second, quick, why don't they want their users to invest rather than just taking the money out?
That's a whole lot of questions, first of all. And yes, you're right, that's a boatload of money, probably enough to sink a small boat. But $100 billion, that really is the big question right now, what they're going to do with this money that they're going to generate from this initial public offering. Nobody really knows for sure. The problem is, the biggest concern is that a lot of investors are not sure whether Facebook has actually figured out a way to monetize its product. What is Facebook's product?
Information, sharing?
Sure. Is it worth $100 billion?
Because the advertising share has already been taken by Google, so it's going to be difficult for them.
No, there's a lot of advertising revenue to go around, but how do you monetize that, for example, on the mobile apps, for example? Yeah. Half of the 900 million users use iPhones or smartphones. There are no ads in that, first of all. And I think some of the concern is that will some of these 900 million users start backing away from Facebook after they realize it's going to take them 30 seconds before they can check their status?
Okay, are you going to buy the shares?
You know, I'm a small investor, so very good chance I probably won't get in on it. All the institutional buyers are already in place. They've got their dibs on it already. It's too bad, because I think really the smaller investors really should have some say in what happens with Facebook. After all, we are Facebook.
Fantastic. Millar Sega, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Time for another break. In just 2 minutes, we'll be back with a look at what the price of oil might mean for your next airline flight. You're watching On Assignment.
Border Crossings is on the air. From VOA Music Mix.
When I come in the morning, I'll go to my computer and I'll check our email to see what requests have come in over the night. This is how we start the show. This one is from Rwanda. His request is for If I Had You by Adam Lambert.
I'm looking up Adam Lambert News, singing by request for Kumator Abo, who is joining us in Rwanda.
This will be cut 12 and CD1.
Cut 12.
My role is director of Border Crossings, so I make sure everything flows in the studio as the show is happening live.
We might have to add a Beatles tune at the end. We're just a little bit short.
Okay, perfect.
I don't even know what's on the show until Larry brings the bucket, like tomorrow's. He'll bring today's and place it in front of me. It's totally an unscripted show.
This is Border Crossings. I'm in the process of getting the songs ready that I'm going to be playing on today's show. You've held your breath, and now you can exhale. It is a party town, and if you've ever been to Party Town, I'm Larry London on Border Crossings.
Good morning, Border Crossings. What is your name, sir?
I take phone requests. I go to the studio every day.
Wolfer?
I get calls from everywhere, from China, just, all over.
Lee's great to work with. He's got experience in broadcasting as a DJ, used to host his own radio show.
I've put together some language service IDs where I've used the resources of VOA to go around to the different language services, and they make great segues between songs.
Слушайте емісію Border Crossings уживо.
London and Border Crossings will return tomorrow right here on the Voice of America. Have a great day, and I'll see you in 23 hours.
Oil prices have been up and down this year, but mostly up. Worries about high oil prices have combined with concerns about European austerity measures and renewed fears of a global economic slowdown.
High energy costs have also brought drastic changes to the airlines. For more, on assignments, Philip Alexio talked with VOA's Jim Randall. Let's take a look.
Jet fuel prices were about 1/7 of the expenses of a typical airline just a decade ago, consuming less of the budget than pay for pilots and other workers. But International Air Transport Association spokesman Perry Flint says that has changed drastically, and fuel costs now exceed salaries.
Today, jet fuel is certainly the largest expense. On an industry-wide basis, we calculate that it represents about 34% of an airline's operating expenses.
The volatile oil prices and the effect that it's having on the airline industry. What effect is it having on the airline industry?
It's driving them crazy. The first couple of months of this year, oil prices went up and up and up, and that forced the industry, the trade group, to trim their predicted profit for the entire industry by about $500 million. Instead of making $3.5 billion, they'll probably make $3 billion, which isn't a whole lot. And it's very difficult to predict what the oil price is going to be, and that makes it hard for them to plan and manage.
Well, what are the airlines doing then to sort of deal with this volatility?
A couple things. One is they hedge. They make a deal with oil sellers that they'll buy a certain amount of aviation kerosene at a certain price at a certain date. That way they've got that price locked in. And sometimes the price is higher than that, and sometimes the price is lower than that. So maybe they make money on the deal, maybe they lose money on the deal, but at least it's predictable and it's easier to manage. The other thing they've done is they've trimmed their staff a lot. They've gotten rid of older, less fuel-efficient aircraft, and they've tried to reduce their costs everywhere they can.
So it's kind of funny because it seems like, at least whenever you fly nowadays, that the planes are always full. So at least as a customer, as a flyer, you would think, oh, they must be doing okay.
Well, they're trying to. What they've done is they've reduced capacity and tried to get it in line with demand. If you're flying an airplane with a lot of empty seats, you might be losing money. I don't know what the break-even point is, but there is one. Let's say, for the sake of argument, it's half full. So if the aircraft is half full, you're breaking even. If it's 3/4 full, then you're making a profit on those seats but if it's less than half full, you're losing money. What will happen to oil prices over the next few months? Rayola Dewar is a senior economic advisor for the American Petroleum Institute, which represents oil companies.
That's really difficult to know.
She says prices rose because of worries that unrest could hurt production in nations that export oil, cutting world supply.
We're into a great deal of uncertainty moving forward, especially with instability in the Middle East. We don't know how that's going to play out. We don't know what will happen with the sanctions with Iran.
The thing that was driving oil prices up, and very well could again, is the uncertainty over the sanctions against Iran. Iran is a very important oil producer, and the international community has put sanctions after sanctions after sanctions, and they're blocking the sale of Iranian oil. Well, that reduces the supply of oil. That tends to raise the price.
Delta wants to remove some of this uncertainty by purchasing its own oil refinery, I think, from ConocoPhillips.
They're trying to make it more certain, and they have a lot of aircraft operating out of the Philadelphia airport, which is right next door to that refinery. And they've had the good sense to not have the airline run this refinery. They've hired refinery experts to run the refinery.
What is this uncertainty saying about, for customers at least now? Because in the end, they're the ones who take the brunt of anything that's happening in the airline business.
It's really hard to airline prices are going to depend on demand and their costs, and that's going to depend on the economic growth or lack of it, and the amount of oil available, and all of these things. It's really hard to tell in the future. I mean, the world has become less certain.
Atrazine is the most widely used weed killer here in the U.S., but its use is controversial, and some studies have linked it to adverse environmental and health effects.
The herbicide is U.S. government approved for corn, sugarcane, and sorghum. Its makers say it is safe when used properly, and farmers say they need it for their yields. VOA's Zulema Palacio went to Maryland recently to talk with farmers about atrazine, and I asked her about it. Let's check that out.
Jamie Jamison produces corn, wheat, and soybean on his 500-hectare farm. To boost production, he uses genetically modified seeds. To control weeds, he uses atrazine. Jamison takes precautions when he sprays atrazine on his fields. He knows the wind could take the pesticide to unintended areas and kill other crops or pollute waterways, but he's convinced its benefits outweighs the risk. There is a growing problem in the United States about toxic chemicals, and Congress is the Senate and the House. They are both working on changing a law that used to regulate toxic chemicals in the United States. But that law is 35 years old. And in those years, we now have over 80,000 chemicals, many of which are toxic, and they have no regulations. Out of 80,000 chemicals, the government is controlling and banning at this point 5 chemicals out of 80,000. And with very little power to actually enforce the use of chemicals.
Syngenta, which is the company that makes that chemical, they have been saying that there is some release, but that release is minimal.
It depends on how you want to look at things. So Syngenta will take the measurements in the water for the whole year and take an average. But the thing is that when you spray atrazine, you only spray it in the spring before you plant corn or soy or things like that. So in those times of the year, the levels of the pesticide is very high. But in the fall, nobody's spraying. So if you take an average, it's very low. If you count the levels of atrazine in the water during the springtime, it's very high and highly toxic.
Syngenta's principal scientist in your story is saying that atrazine is safe if used properly. So the question is that who checks to see if it's being used properly?
Nobody. But I asked that question to the scientist, the head scientist, and his answer was that farmers know better how much they can put in the land without causing damages. You have to be certified to buy atrazine in this country, and you have to be extremely careful. For example, going into the U.S. Department of Agriculture to deal with Syngenta and put it in the trunk for spraying, they have to wear protective gear, full dress, mask, gloves, before they deal with the product.
What's the role of EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, in that?
EPA has a big role in it, but they decline to comment on it. Their website recognizes a lot of issues and a lot of concerns about its toxicity, but they decline to talk.
And EU had banned atrazine. What would you say about the differences in policies when we compare the United States with EU?
The European Union is a lot more cautious about what they use and what not. They have created a chemical law for the European Union that is banning a lot of chemicals that are still used in the United States. So the European Union found levels of atrazine in their underground waters. And at that point they say, that's it, no more atrazine here. We have atrazine in a lot of the underground water in the United States, but we still consider that those low amounts are okay.
Okay, and lastly, why did you want to do this story?
Because I do cover all the environmental issues, and I believe these years will be remembered as the chemical toxic years, with the time when we intoxicated our planet with huge amounts of chemicals, throwing them on the land to us, to drink it, we take it, and I don't think we are making enough noise about the toxicity of many of these products.
We go now to an informal settlement in Nairobi, Kenya, where a group of musicians is building drums and other instruments out of nothing but discarded materials.
Well, Imran, we do know the saying that one person's trash is another's treasure. And in this week's full story feature, Kathy Mitney reports that these so-called slum drummers are also helping young people stay on the right track. Let's check it out.
It's hard to imagine that this instrument, called a kalimba, is actually an old cooking pot that has been fished out of this place. But Nairobi's slum drummers are masters at making beautiful music from less than beautiful objects, like these tubes. That produce a distinctive twanging sound when hit. Joel Mwiruri is singer and percussionist with Slum Drummers.
It's called the tubaphone, from the word tube, because it's made of the tube. In our group, the tubaphone is like a piano. It gives us the pitch and the notes.
Band members make all their instruments using materials they collect from dump sites, metal scrap yards, or even their neighbors. Mwiruri says this differentiates Slum Drummers from all other bands and sends a powerful message to the poor.
You cannot show them that we are buying instrument. How will they be able to buy instrument? So we want to show them that what you are living with you can make a difference with that.
The group aims to reach out to the youth and others living in Nairobi's teeming informal settlements, or slums, with a message to stay away from drugs and to reject a life of crime. Eunice Ruguru is a dancer and drummer with the group.
We give them the message of hope and to encourage them, because some street children have lost, some of them have already lost their hope.
Band members themselves report experiencing a sense of hope and transformation in their own lives after joining Slum Drummers.
Instead of begging, can I do something in order to... Now I'm not begging, I'm selling you something. I'm making something to sell to you.
Slum Drummers plays for a variety of audiences, ranging from street children in informal settlements to international audiences at cultural centers. Kathy Maitney for VOA News, Nairobi.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to join us again next week. We'll look at a controversial pipeline in Burma and a Cambodian-American photographer documenting the lives of Cambodians in America.
Until then, you can find us at voanews.com on the Programs tab and on Facebook as well. From all of us at On Assignment, thanks for watching.